started here in a few minutes as soon as we see our numbers tick up. It always takes a few moments of breathing at the beginning of each call. We are recording, and the PowerPoint will be up shortly on your screen. And of course, our standard questions already have an answer to. Yes, you will get this PowerPoint presentation and all the QA questions and answers that we do on this call, as well as the recording. All of that will be posted next week at some point. So welcome, welcome. Happy December. Let's get rolling on our HMIS lead and system admin call. So you should be on this call if you're an HMIS lead or an HMIS admin. Also, you may have a role in your community around the HUD SNAPS data strategy, which there's a link to that there. You can check out what that strategy is, and it's all about building the capacity of the people and the systems in our community so that we can better end homelessness. So you might also be somebody who is doing ESG CV uploads now with this new bundling thing that's going on, and so you've been invited to the call in that regard as well. So we go over lots of information on this call. It's monthly. It's the third Wednesday of every month. We have the call schedule as the last slide every month for upcoming calls. If you are new and want to go and revisit, or you've been told to go revisit some past guidance we've given on one of these calls, or past conversations we've had about different things on one of these calls, you can log into the hub. If you don't have a hub account, we have a link to that at the end as well. We can set you up on the hub, and you can go and find the monthly webinar archives and download any past materials going back years and years and years. Don't go back too far, because stuff changes, and we update what we can as soon as we can. So make sure you're not referencing too old of guidance. Might not be current. So during the call, you are all muted. We are all on camera in front of you and have various roles to play throughout the call. And again, we're recording this, and yes, the slides will be sent out, the recording will be posted, the Q&A will be posted for you on the hub to access within about a week of us having this call. And just make sure, if you can, to note the slide number or the topic that you're asking a question about. We really want your questions and answers today. We actually have a lot of time, we think. We have a lot of content, but we have a lot of time too. Kind of like your time. It's the end of the year call. We want to help address any issues you're having out in the field and take the time to do that. So you would use the Q&A panel on the right-hand side of your screen to ask your question, and any number of us hopefully can provide you an answer. And if we either don't get to your question before the end of the call, or we tell you to enter an AAQ because we can't do that in-depth of a question in this forum, the way to enter an AAQ is to go to the HUD Exchange and make sure that you're selecting HMIS from the list of things your question is related to. And again, if you can reference slide decks, or even just give us context in the AAQ, it's all the same people on the screen who answer your AAQs too. We just get a little bit more time to do it in that setting, and we love to know when you're referencing a certain slide or a certain topic that you heard on this system admin call. That's always really helpful to us. Okay, so on the screen in the meeting today, Fran Ledger, of course, as always, from the SNAPS office. Welcome, Fran. And alphabetically, we have Meredith from the Partnership Center, Scott from the Partnership Center, Jesse from Apt Associates, Brian from Cloudburst. I am here as well from Apt Associates, and Melissa is in the background helping us with all things Adobe Connect and technical. So if you have any issues connecting, or if you have questions about the Adobe platform, Melissa is the person to address those to. And let's get started. So we're going to do just some general end of the year updates. These are things that we've really touched on throughout the year already. You guys know this work going on. You're the ones working the hardest right now on things like the HUD Bash import tool, SAGE and ESG CV updates, system performance measures, PIT hit counts, LSA, and we have a little pop quiz at the end because that's what we like to do. We also are seeking some opinions from you on a data standard question we had come up, so there'll be an opportunity for some interaction at the end in that regard. And let's get started, huh? Meredith, you are up first with the HUD Bash tool.
Thanks, Mary. Hi, everyone. We are going to spend just a couple minutes here walking through the HUD Bash tool. I know that it's been posted on the HUD Exchange for a while now. Not sure if everyone's had a chance to actually look at it. So we wanted to take just a minute to sort of walk through some steps at a very high level and sort of process through the use of the tool. So what we're going to walk through here is, yeah, thanks, Melissa. I can share my screen now. Give me just 1 second to make sure I get the right screen. And can you see my screen? I can't see anyone, so if you're nodding, can I get an audible yes?
We can see it.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thanks. So again, just want to walk through high level, just sort of the bullet points of how you would use the HUD Bash Homes to HMIS CSV translator, HUD Bash translator tool. It is an Excel book, workbook that you can download from the HUD Exchange. The first time you open it, you will likely need to enable the content. Make sure that you do that. You'll see a little bar at the top to enable the content. I've already done this one just in the interest of time. But you'll notice in the first tab here that there is a set of instructions. So we would really encourage you to read through that set of instructions before you get started using the tool. This should help walk through what you need to do. The other thing that you're going to need to make sure that you have is your data file from your local VA Med Center. And we'll talk a little bit about this in a second, but it's important that they send you the CSV file and that you don't change anything in the CSV file because it has to be the CSV in order to work in the tool. So this is just a silly little sample data set for those of you that haven't maybe yet seen this from your VA. It will come in this format in a single flat file with all of the different data elements along the top row up here and then populated with the data that's available from homes. So you will have this file, which is what you will need to import into the tool. So when you open up the second tab on the tool, you're going to see a few different fields here that you have to fill out. So you have to enter your COC number, the export start and end date, org name, project ID, and organization ID. Those probably seem very familiar as they are PDDEs that then get put into the CSV files that are generated by this tool. So once you've completed this required information, if you care to fill out this optional information, you can do so. We had a couple of communities that gave us some feedback that it would be helpful to have this information, so we added it here. But so what you're going to do first is import your homes data. So that report we just looked at, you're going to click the import button and you're going to find that file wherever you've saved it on your computer. You're going to select it, you're going to click open, and it takes a few seconds, probably a little longer obviously if you've got a lot more records in here. But it's pretty quick. We'll let you know when it is finished. And then you can simply click the Export HMIS CSV button to generate your CSV. So you'll see a dialog box that tells you, you're selecting the folder you want to place it in. So again, I've got my little folder set up here. I want to put it in my Bash test folder. I'm going to click OK, and it's going to generate that CSV for you. Again, it takes just a few seconds. Will take a little bit longer with a larger data set, obviously, but it doesn't take too terribly long. And then you can go look at this export. So this is the one that we just created. This is the zipped HMIS CSV, and you'll see here that it has 7 files. These are the 7 files that have data that is part of the HUD Bash project or the HUD Bash program. So you'll notice that there are some files that aren't included here, so assessment.csv, event.csv, services.csv. You know, there's a number of them that are not applicable, so they're not included here. The communities that we did some testing with didn't have any trouble with that, but if you had trouble, yeah.
Sorry, your screen is kind of blacked out, the part, the extra window you're trying to show right now. So, yeah.
Okay.
Maybe you just shared like the one Excel, the tool, but not any other windows on your screen, or maybe you didn't share the whole screen.
I did the whole screen. Let me just try something. Let me try it again. Hold on. Getting there. How about now?
Yeah, that's good. That's perfect. Yep, now we can.
Okay, sorry
you.
about that. So I was just showing that in your folder that you create, you will see your HMIS export. It will show the 7 files. If you were to open those files, it should look familiar in the format that the HMIS CSV takes, right? So this has taken that single flat file from the homes database and parsed it out into the 7 different CSV files for the HMIS. Again, they all should look very familiar. They should align with the format of the HMIS CSV. So once you have the CSV file, this HMIS export file, the HMIS CSV, however you want to call it, then that would be what could be imported into the HMIS. And again, we've done this with a couple of different communities that were able to successfully import it into their HMIS. We are aware that some software don't necessarily have that capability. They don't have the ability to do it easily or quickly or free in some cases. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But generally speaking, the idea was to have this in a format that was a standardized format, as opposed to having to have the vendors create custom imports for the format that it comes out of the homes database. So again, there are, Melissa, can you put the slides back up? There are, the tool is available on the HUD Exchange. There are some commonly asked questions that have been developed with HUD and VA. We also actually have a couple more that I wanted to talk through with you all today that have just come up as people have been using the tool. But please submit an AAQ if you have any questions about the tool or if it's not working correctly for you. So the first question we've gotten a couple times has to do with getting errors when running the data through the tool. There have been some Excel errors that have popped up or some issues with the exporting of the CSV. So a couple sort of tips for addressing that. First of all, making sure that you have the most recent version of the tool available. There was a slight update made about a couple weeks ago to the tool, so there is a 1.1 version available on the HUD Exchange. Please make sure you're using that version. Also, like I mentioned, please make sure that your VA Med Center and you yourself don't modify anything in the report that you get from homes. It has to be in that format. It can't be saved as an Excel file, for example. It has to be saved as the HMIS CSV, or I'm sorry, as a CSV file. So just don't modify it in any way. We also get a lot of questions from folks. We get them, and VA's been getting a number of them, about getting more information about the participants that are in the HUD VASH program. And the short answer is no. You can't get any more information. This is the information that VA Med Center is authorized to provide. So ideally at some point, maybe in the future, we could revisit that, or there may be some other ways to get some additional data. But at this point, this is it. The data in that Homes UDE report is all that they're able to provide. There is an expectation that there would be a HUD VASH project set up in HMIS sort of as a target for this data to go to. We've had some questions from folks about where does the data actually even go. So ideally there is a project set up you've recorded the project name, the project ID, and the tool so that that all gets incorporated into the CSV. But that would be the target in your system for this data to be sent to. We've also had a few questions from folks about situations where there are clients that are now appearing to be enrolled in multiple PH projects at the same time. So there may have been a services project that was offering supportive services to folks in the HUD VASH program, or there may have been, drawing a blank on what the other example was, another project is housing the person somehow. Either way, there are situations where there are some overlapping enrollments. We would encourage you to take a look at how your projects are set up. Look at the project setup tool, see if there is a way that you can combine projects in some fashion so that you only have a single enrollment if your data sharing allows for you to have them enrolled in a single project rather than having them enrolled in multiple projects where they're now getting counted multiple times. And then I think this is the last one here. We've had this question come in about the HIC. Can the entire VASH project be counted as HMIS participating since we don't have household information, or does a separate non-participating project need to be set up for non-vet beds? So this question has come in because we don't have household number data, right? Like the VA only has the information about the veteran, so we're only getting information about the veteran. HUD has decided that the entire project can be considered as participating in HMIS with this upload, and that there's no need to split up the project into participating versus non-participating. That was one of the goals here, was to increase participation in HMIS, and we want to allow you to do that by having that single project instead of setting up multiple projects here. Just a couple of quick reminders. If you have a data sharing partnership or data entry process already with your local VA Med Center, this is not something that you are required to do. There is no requirement to change something or fix what's not broken in your system. If you've got a process that works, you're encouraged to keep doing that. This tool and this import process was really for those communities that had no other way to get any of this information from the VA for HMIS. Again, HUD recommends that leads focus on incorporating this data no later than the 2021 HIC. If you don't know who your VA HUD VASH point of contact is yet, work with your COC to help make that connection and develop a plan for, who's going to reach out and how often you're going to be getting this data, so on and so forth. You may need to work with your vendor. Like I've already mentioned, that is it's just going to vary based on the software provider. There are some, like I mentioned, that already have the ability to do this currently. There are communities that are currently uploading this data. There are others that are having to develop a slightly different process with their vendor. We would encourage you to work directly with your vendor on that. Like I mentioned earlier, HUD recognizes that there may be a cost associated with this and building out this functionality for the import process. There is in the commonly asked questions document reference to this also, but the COC funds, are eligible to be used for this purpose. So I know that's not always comforting because these funds are being taxed in lots of different ways, but it is an eligible expense for your HMIS funds. And I think that was it on HUD VASH. And I can take questions, or I can go through and read them, Mary, however you want, or Brian, however you want me to handle that.
I have two off the top of my head for you to just kind of speak to, and it's about that COC VA overlap again. Just how do they figure out which clients go into which files and from which VA areas, et cetera. And then secondly, are the vendors, and maybe easier to answer first, are the vendors waiting on anything from HUD to have this tool be used? Is the tool not done in some way?
The tool is done. The report from homes is done. That data is available. to the COCs and HMIS leads currently. All VA med centers we've confirmed have the ability to generate this report. So to the question about the issue with COCs and VA catchment areas overlapping with each other, this was an issue that HUD and VA struggled with when this effort was originally starting. There is a lot of overlap. They acknowledge that, and there wasn't a great way to be able to parse out who goes to what COC from a particular VA catchment area. They explored a number of different possibilities, but there wasn't one that was sort of a magic bullet that helped fix any of these issues. So within the VA's home system, they do have the ability to do some limited filtering. They can filter by public housing authority. They can actually look at the full list of clients. It's going to require in those COCs where the VA catchment area is bigger than their COC, it will require some coordination and collaboration between the VA Med Center and the HMIS lead or the COC to figure out which clients go where. This is something that hopefully will get improved over time, but at this point, working directly with them, using the filters that they have available, and then going through the clients is the only option we have at this point.
I don't have anything else that you didn't already answer on the slides already or put in your, what do we call them? Commonly asked questions, CAQs.
Okay.
Brian, did you see anything trending?
Yeah, just one about the recommended frequency of the imports. Is there any guidance on that?
There isn't a recommendation. In order to be compliant with participation in HMIS, there has to be an annual, what's the word I'm looking for? Data collection?
Participating in HMIS is defined as an annually, at least once annually. This is defined in the 2004 spec. So participating means at least once annually you have the client data on the clients served by that project. So anything more frequently than annually is kind of up to you to figure out. But annually also doesn't necessarily get you the best data quality, right? It doesn't help you plan locally and doesn't give you all that like coordinated entry things you might want. So there's like things you've got to decide locally that are going to help you and benefit you in knowing your veteran population, et cetera.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Moving right along.
Hi, everyone. Just a few reminders today. First up, one with SAGE. Many AAQs have been coming into the SAGE desk lately, addressing concerns in the APR and the CAPR around the utilization occupancy rate, which pertain to questions 7 and 8 on these reports. So specifically, the concern is often that the number of persons or households served is not lining up with the expected count of persons, households who moved into housing, impacting utilization rates or the anticipated utilization rate. So I want to note that more often than not, this is due to a housing move-in date not being recorded in HMIS. So just a small reminder here, if you're generating a report that is showing some discrepancy within that utilization, that field is just a good place to go and check on and to make sure whether or not that needs to be there. SAGE ESG CV reporting reminders. Just want to walk through a handful of these. First and foremost, defining a bundle, which is SAGE's favorite word. I'm sure everyone loves to hear about. So a bundle refers to a project or projects in the same component with the same start date and end dates that are coming from a single HMIS or comparable database implementation. So starting with Q1, which ends in a couple weeks here, all reporting projects will be included in 2 bundles. There will be a quarterly bundle, which will be reporting on activities that occurred during this first quarter, which is 10/1 to 12/31, and there will be a cumulative bundle, which will report on all activities from the report start date in the initial period through the end of quarter one, it's 12/31. So I think it's worth repeating here that for ESGCV, the initial period, which can be as early as January 21 of this year and ending on 9/30, is not Q1, but it's simply the initial period. Q1 begins as it normally would on 10/1, and all cumulative reports will continue to source back into that report start date in the initial period. So as before, Sage will put projects into the necessary bundles for you, and recipients will send a link to HMIS and VSP contacts to the reporting portal where uploads will occur. So one thing to really look out for is when you get that link to that reporting portal, there will be the necessary date ranges and projects that need to be selected in order to upload the appropriate bundles. Some other reporting reminders for ESGCV, projects missing from the initial report. So for projects that were retroactively funded back into the initial period, but were not included in the initial report, those projects will now be reported on during Q1. So no changes need to be made to the initial report in that regard. Late starters and early enders, those are exactly as they sound. Late starters are those coming online during Q1 or Q2, Q3, and so on, and recipients are responsible for adding these projects in Sage and setting the appropriate start dates. So that's a recipient responsibility. Early enders are those projects closing prior to the end of Q1 or any subsequent quarter, and again, recipients are responsible for indicating the month the project ended in Sage. That said, keeping these early enders and late starters in mind, when HMIS and VSP contacts receive the link to the reporting portal, they're going to have specific date ranges and projects from Sage that could fall into early enders or late starters. And so it's important to keep a close eye on those dates and those projects as they're popping up and down, because they may not be as prescriptive dates. This is probably small for everyone to see, but again, these slides will go around if you can't see everything. This is a timeline, a suggested timeline rather, for ESGCV reporting. And it's something that's been shared with recipients during office hours in the past couple of weeks. So I want to make sure that it was made visible to HMIS and VSP contacts as well, so that everyone can kind of be on the same suggested guide. So really the reminder is if you are the HMIS lead or VSP contact and you have not heard from your recipient around the 10th of the month, next month in January, reach out to them, get in touch with them. Because as the lead, you'll have 3 business days to review the bundles, and it's really important that you take those 3 days, know when those 3 days are coming, and allocate time to review those bundles during that 3-day window. It's a lot of extra work on the recipients to have to pull back the bundles because it's not something that they can do on their own in Sage. They have to put in a request to the AAQ in order to get that taken care of. So everything goes a lot smoother if HMIS leads and VSP contacts have a good, healthy heads up around when those bundles will be available for them to check out. And then really at the end, I just want to emphasize that it's the recipient's responsibility to close out. So it is the recipient who is responsible for actually hitting submit, not the HMIS lead, not the COC, not subrecipients. They're the ones that are responsible for getting this one up. And then just a few other reporting tips, some things that have come up from the AAQs that will hopefully just help us provide service at a better speed. Questions about deleting or changing bundles, as said, need to be submitted to the AAQ, and they need to be submitted by the recipient. If Sage is showing an error at any point when you're trying to do an upload, please provide a screenshot of the error or copy and paste the error name into the AAQ. Those things will go a long way in helping us just resolve the issue at a faster rate. If you're having issues uploading a file, please explain which files you're attempting to upload. For example, Caper, APR, and export from a comparable system, and give the name of the person who, or the project that the link was being uploaded for. All those things that we can look at the back end of Sage, but it takes us a while to try to figure out, and we won't be 100% clear which file you're attempting to upload. We'll just see what the upload error is. So that'll help us unpack that at a better speed. And then finally, just please review the HMIS contact information for your community. You can follow through that link. There's a request form in there, I believe. And just make sure that if your contacts aren't up to date, that you get them up to date. And that way we can just track down the appropriate parties and communicate everything clearly. I think that is all on my end. So I'm going to click ahead here.
Thanks, Scott. I don't think there was a ton of questions specifically. There's a little bit of traffic around the housing move-in date, but we're answering those, so I don't think we need to verbally come up. And the key answer is go read the HMIS data manual, and if you have additional scenarios that you feel that aren't covered in there, go ahead and submit an AAQ. But there are different, you know, basically like enter housing move-in date when the client moves into housing, enter housing move-in date when the client moves into housing, and there might be other scenarios that are addressed in the manual that you'll want to review. So, Fran? Hope you're on mute, but also you were gonna, it's not on the screen, but remember to just address the system performance measures first before you jump into LSA. Oh, there's still no noise. So, see if we can get Fran connected. You guys can hear me, right? On?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Fran's working on it. So she's going to call back in. So while we have a second, were there any other, Scott or Meredith or Jesse or Brian, did you see anything that could be addressed from Scott's slides verbally while we wait for Fran to call back in?
Can I say something? It's not directly related to what Scott was talking about, but sort of a theme I think I'm seeing in some of the questions that have come in around project setup for ESGCV. And we've seen this one come in a number of times in the AAQ in different ways too. And I just want to reiterate to folks that per the ESG guidance in the manual, projects should be set up in alignment with the component with which they're funded. So if you are funding a services project, there's not a services project, services only project in ESG. It is funded under a component. So it may be essential services for shelter, it may be under rapid rehousing, whatever funding component is used should comport with the type of project that is set up. So there's a little table in the HMIS manual that breaks down how these align and how they should be set up. So I would encourage you to take a look at that table. If you have questions about that,
a co-moderator has joined the conference.
Submit an AAQ.
Thanks, Meredith. And that might be Fran coming back on.
I am. Are you able to hear me now?
We can hear you. Yay.
Excellent. Great. So let me talk just a moment about the LSA. So as everybody should probably know, the LSA was extended until January 15th. We received a lot of requests that came in. I know that folks are really concentrating on planning for the point-in-time count. You may be in a community where there's been a surge in COVID cases, and you're continuing to do, regardless, you're continuing to do COVID prevention and COVID safety planning. And then, of course, we have both LSA submissions. So, and you've been working hard at that. So we've gone ahead and done an extension till the 15th. So we're happy to be able to do that. And then also, make sure that you can, you're using this time to kind of do your data quality checking and continue to work with your liaison. There's more information there. Jesse, do you want to talk more about the LSA? I'm sure you have a lot to talk about.
Thank you. Great. Well, just to echo what Fran said, we really appreciate all the hard work that you guys are putting in. On the LSA, we understand that it's a really challenging process, and we just really appreciate the diligence that everybody's showing. I did want to talk a minute about the holiday schedule here. So right now, we are running those error warnings files on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and then people are getting them back in the next day or two. Those files, it's not like at 3 p.m. Eastern time, we hit a button and they just automatically generate and they're there and the liaisons can start working with them right away. It actually takes 8 hours for all of those reports to generate, and so the Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, there's essentially no ability to review those. So then Wednesday morning when the liaisons come in, they start trying to rock through those, and then they also need the reviewers' input, and so that's why sometimes you don't see it the next business day. And I feel like maybe we weren't super clear about that when we initially talked about the schedule. And this schedule also kind of gives that appearance that they will definitely post the next day, and that's not quite the case. The schedule is modified over the holiday season, so there will be runs for the 22nd, the 26th, the 29th, etc. And then after the Tuesday, January 5th, it just goes back to the regular Tuesday, Thursday schedule. So, okay. I wanted to talk about a couple of things that are coming up that it seems like a lot of communities are running into, so I just thought it would be great to talk through them and make sure that we're all on the same page. So one of the questions I've been getting a lot is, why am I getting a flag for inventory on projects that closed before the reporting period? I want to be really, really clear that in the LSA, the inventory is only being pulled in for the current year, the reporting period itself, right? So the reason that this is happening, when I've dug in and people have reported this issue and been concerned that the flag isn't working correctly, is that the LSA calculated file, which is also looking at people who were active during the reporting period, has people in it connected to this project that is supposed to be closed. And the reason that that is happening probably is because a project was closed, but those clients were not actually exited, and so their enrollments are just going on indefinitely, right? So that would be the very first thing to check if you're being asked for inventory because you have enrollments, is to make sure that everybody was exited out of that project as you would expect it to be. Okay. If that is not the case and you have nobody who's currently enrolled in those projects that are throwing that flag, please reach out to your liaison so that we can look into it. That has been the case for every case I've looked into, though. So hopefully that will help you all out on that one. Okay, here's another scenario. So our facility limited the number of people that it was serving due to COVID-19 and the need for social distancing. Why is this being flagged for low utilization? So we're seeing this a lot where maybe shelters were only allowing 50% of the capacity in on any given night to allow for social distancing, etc. And it seems like maybe people did not necessarily catch that there was guidance on this specifically, that if due to an infectious disease response, the existing dedicated homeless year-round beds are removed from the community's inventory, which means that they're not available for an extended period of time, HMIS inventory records should be updated according to the HMIS data manual. Now, we haven't necessarily defined the extended period of time specifically, but I think that we can all agree that, you know, if it's been offline since March, it makes sense to go ahead and do an update. And that brings me to just like in general, why are you being asked to update your inventory? And this was a question that I had too for the AR team. I really wanted to better understand, like, what is this data being used for? So I thought it would be helpful to share with you that the AHAR team is relying on the inventory records reflecting actual bed and unit availability during the period as closely as possible in order to estimate utilization. It's also important to know that these are household type specific calculations just because of the structure of the AHAR. So where there are variations between the estimated beds available and the household type and actual beds, it's helpful to update the inventory to reflect this. So I do truly understand how challenging it is to track the inventory in an accurate manner, and I do understand that it's a lot of information to update during this process. But the reason that we're asking you for it is because we do need to report out to Congress the degree to which these projects that are being funded are also being utilized. Okay. I wanted to talk for a second about flag 848. Sounds like a lot of folks are seeing this. So what this says is that you reported that there were households active in this project whose enrollment was not associated with any continuum of care. Because we rely so much on that client location, this issue could have a larger impact on usability. So there are two places that a COC code kind of comes into play, right? Meaning like maybe your California 500 or whatever. That's your COC code. One is 2.07. It's the third field there. And that is where you are attaching a COC code to the project itself. So first thing to check is to make sure that the project that is causing this flag does in fact have the correct code attached to it. But the other place is actually 3.16, which is specific to an enrollment. Both of these have to be complete. It might be useful to know that if you have a continuum of care that is, or if you have an HMIS that is dedicated to a single continuum of care, it's possible that this value is being defaulted. And so it might not be something that you're aware of or conscious of as much as this 2.0703. But I just want to point out that it's not just that this is complete. We also have to make sure that this 3.16 is complete. So the other piece is that this element has not always been there. And so one thing to check is that if you have enrollments that predate when this element came online or when there were changes, you do have to update those records if they continue to be active once that standard came into play, and certainly for this reporting period. So if you have somebody who's been enrolled in your permanent supportive housing project for 8 years or something like that, if they don't have a COC code attached to their record as they should, this flag is going to get tripped. Okay. I think, yes, those are all of the LSA updates that I have for you all. Were there any questions that make sense to go ahead and address right now?
I don't think so. A lot of them are really specific and not universally applicable. So go through, but we'll have time at the end if you want to escalate anything. And we've assigned them to you, Jesse. Your audio is a little fuzzy for all of us, so maybe we'll just let you type things in and not. But we'll see if you want to at the end, or if you want to maybe change out your headphones or something while you're answering questions. So let's go into the, yeah, thank you. That was great. Okay, pop quiz time. Is my audio okay? Am I fuzzy or anything? I'm okay.
It's good.
Okay. All right. So we're not going to go poll. We're not going to, nobody's going to see what you answer, but this is just test your own knowledge. Answers are on the next slide. What should I do in HMIS if an existing household is adding a member to their household? So your choices are create a new household for only the new member, the other household remains as is, add the new member to the existing household in the project record, or exit the current incomplete household and re-enroll everyone at once in a new project record as a complete household. The answer is B. I see that a lot of people answered B in the Q&A, and that's great. So if you thought it was something else, just another opportunity on your holiday break to crack open that HMIS data manual and refresh. I know I will be reading that document over my break. Question 2. If a client currently in emergency shelter gets an enrollment in rapid rehousing and a unit is identified for them to move into next week, but then they leave the emergency shelter project to stay with friends over the weekend, what is the correct exit destination from the emergency shelter project? Exit destination from the emergency shelter project. So staying or living with friends temporary, staying or living with friends permanent, or rental by client with an RRH or equivalent subsidy? And the answer is A. Cool. Some people said A. So any of those others, I mean, you know, we want you to be exact. Destination is about exactly where they were going to reside at the moment they exited the project, and that's really what we have folks focus on when specific questions roll up to the AAQ. This is, of course, Brian and I coming up with things that we kind of see as recurring themes throughout the year, not based on specific things, but wanted to point out destination, always the exact destination that they're going to at that time. So when can I share personally identifying information, or some people call personal protected information, PPI or PII from HMIS? A, anytime you want to. B, never under any circumstances. Or C, under whatever uses and disclosures are identified in my COC's HMIS privacy notice. And it looks like the majority of those typing in are choosing the right answer, and that's great. So your privacy notice defines how you can and can't and when you are and aren't supposed to disclose personally identifying information. And it's not an all or never scenario. It should be under certain uses, it's disclosed, and those are identified in the 2004. There's a minimal 2004 uses and disclosures of data, and then there are things under the 2004 data standards that you need to get permission to do, and you list all of those things out in your privacy notice, and that's how you are covered in terms of what disclosures you are and are not allowed to do using HMIS. Funny side note, at the recent internal meeting, there was a pop quiz on all things related to 2004, specifically music stuff going on in 2004, and it was because 2004 is such a big number for all of us still in the HMIS world, and it was kind of fun. So go look up some 2004 trivia, and you might be happy you did. Introduce you to some new stuff, or stuff you haven't thought about in years. Okay, final pop quiz question. How do I set up my CDBG CV projects in HMIS? Do I A, follow the CDBG program HMIS manual? Or B, do HMIS project setup for the CDBG CV project just like I do for ESG CV? Or C, there is no CDBG requirement for HMIS, therefore this is a local decision. And the answer is, ooh, you guys are good. I don't think we tripped up anyone on these, Brian, do you? Okay, you're all smart. No more pop quizzes. I'll save it for next December. The last thing that we want you to type in and give us some insight into, so we've had a suggestion that the no exit interview completed language for 3.12 destination is confusing and doesn't really just what it's, you know, Meredith, I'd love for you to jump in here too, make sure I don't say anything wrong. It is intended to just say like the client like left the project basically without an exit interview being done, so we don't have that information. But some people have escalated the issue that that is confusing language, or that it could be kind of easily opted into and doesn't really force, I guess, the real specific thoughts about what you know about the destination the client is going to, or asking the client what destination they're going to, and kind of defaulting to no exit interview completed because it's kind of easy and covers your bases. So the suggestion is made to change, and we want to hear from you if it should be left alone, because it's really not that confusing, and it's a training issue locally, and you should be really instructing your HMIS users well around the uses of this and every other data element, right? That's the job of the HMIS leads. Or if you did have suggestions for the language changing, what suggestion that would be. As you guys know, and as I went over on the last call, you know, we're in the middle of a data standard change cycle. We're always in the middle of a data standard change cycle, but we're getting closer to data standard changes for fiscal year 2022 being finalized, release of vendors that'll happen in the spring of 2021 on the time frame of a 2-year cycle. And so these are the, we wanted some feedback, some opinions from this very smart, obviously, you all passed the pop quiz, group of HMIS users. So thank you. We see a lot of leave it alone, which I think was our inclination. Meredith has a great term. She says almost every 2 seconds when we're having these calls, is the juice worth the squeeze? If it's not worth the squeeze, we shouldn't do it. And also there's like value around consistency, right? If we keep changing stuff every 2 years, you never get that kind of longitude of data quality. Anyway, Meredith, do you have anything to add there? Did I say that right?
Yeah, the only thing I was going to add, just a little more historical context, I think we added this response option back in 2014, and when we were really pushing for like a auto-exiting folks from night-by-night shelters in particular, or street outreach projects, and this was a good option for indicating that that person exited without an interview. So it just was not that that person wasn't asked the question or that they refused to provide the information, like there just was no exit interview complete. So I just wanted to give that little bit of historical context and just remind folks that that does count as missing. It's kind of the equivalent of missing information at the end of the day. But so if there's a training issue for some communities, we would be happy to improve some guidance in the manual or make it clearer to folks what actually the intention is with that data element. So thank you all for your feedback here. Very helpful.
Although we've made Brian's life infinitely harder by commingling responses to our questions with actual real questions. So I think we can all kind of stare at the questions that have come in and claim questions that we see need to still be answered. We've got, again, lots of time to do so. We really want to spend some time hanging out with you and answering questions that feel like they haven't been addressed. So to that end, we would.
There's something that
about SPM,
yeah,
right?
Yes.
Great.
So there's something I want to talk about with SPMs. So those aren't due, right? Your SPMs are due until March 1st, 2021. But HUD's expectation is that those reports be available for communities to be able to start running those and seeing what the data looks like. And the specs were put out in October 2019. Now vendors may be making changes to their systems that may be impacting those reports, but really our hope is by early January, all communities should have access to that. Now, when communities are having issues getting access to these types of reports that you are relying on, like APRs, like SPMs, like LSAs, the things that you need to kind of fall back on is those contracting mechanisms that you have in place with your vendors. So I wanted to touch on the SPMs and our expectations around that, but also there are things that you can do as communities and your relationship with your vendors, if you're finding that these things are not available to you in a timely way, if you're seeing that you're heading into towards the end of January and you're not seeing reports that you need to be able to ready yourself for submitting things to HUD, then you should be able to look to those. Also, I just want to say on the HIC-PIT front, we already covered that. There's a lot of stuff that's out now. There's been a lot of office hours that have been provided, some really good resources. I'm going to post up a link so you can go and look at some of the recordings already. But just keep in mind for us, what's the most important thing is that you are keeping people who are experiencing homelessness safe, that you're keeping volunteers safe, that you're keeping staff safe. So we've created a lot of flexibilities around the unsheltered counts. Take a look at that, learn about what those flexibilities are, see if there's anything that you need to do in your community to make adjustments. And then you can, if needed, you can submit something to us to ask for an exception. A lot of things you don't need an exception for, so really get clear on, is this something I need to request an exception for? And if you do, then submit one. There's a lot of stuff that is not, that you don't even need to require an exception for. So the information is available, and we'll post it in just a moment.
Okay, so I'm going to do a blanket kind of statement here. Thank you, Fran, for that. If you submitted in addition to saying whether leave it alone or suggested changes, I'm just taking those in. I'm not going to respond to them. There's a lot there. And also if you, as part of that discussion, submitted other suggestions, I'm taking those as well, but we're not going to respond to them right now. And then also in terms of data standard changes, you can always submit an AAQ, and that is fine. We will take suggestions that way as well. Jesse, how's your audio? Do you want to talk about anything in particular with LSA, or Meredith or Scott have any other BASH or SAGE stuff to go over?
I know there were a couple HIT questions, Mary or Jesse. I don't know if one of you could tackle those or if we want those to come into the AAQ.
There were a few I said to go to AAQ because they were pretty specific, but and you know, the biggest rub with that is like what constitutes a minor fluctuation versus what constitutes changing things in your inventory records. So I think because I think it would be wise to get those things written down in the AAQ so we can spend a little bit of time on them and give you the right guidance, especially because those tend to be very specific, situation specific. I think that would be my best guess on those, but I'll look through them again after I get done writing the answers to this one. Okay, so like maybe such as trying to see if I can filter through. Hey, Fran, you want to talk about the NOFA process?
Yes, I was
Did you do a
just answering. I was just answering that to say there is no news about the NOFA process. The best thing you can do is make sure that you're signed up for the COC ESG listserv from the HUD Exchange. As soon as we have information, it will be blasted out on those listserv announcement lists, and it will also be posted to the HUD Exchange news section. I wish we had news for you, but we don't. We're also figuring that out in snaps. So stay tuned.
All right, I have an inventory one. If we have a FEMA-funded hotel program for COVID, they get rooms as they are needed. There is no set number of rooms. How will this be recorded on the HIC? So FEMA-funded, I know for California at least, and maybe Brian wants to jump in here too. So FEMA-funded hotel programs are not designated specifically for persons experiencing homelessness. And so we have recommended when asked, and people have made decisions with how they're going to direct that funding locally that might affect this answer, but when asked and when we, have been given all of the criteria around the FEMA-funded program, it tends to become a non-continuum project. So if you're going to track the FEMA-funded COVID response beds in HMIS, you would set them up as not a continuum project, which means it is excluded from your HIC, it's excluded from your LSA. You don't count those folks on the night of the pit. Non-continuum projects are basically those projects that you may have in HMIS but aren't designated for persons experiencing homelessness. Anybody else jump in if I said anything wrong there? I think that's right.
That's right. There's more information on the COVID-19 HMIS page about inventory changes and project setup during the pandemic. That outlines all of the PDDs you should be setting up when you set up a project like that.
On the APR, if you have a null relationship to HOH, client location will not show up as an error. Null relationship to HOH, client location will not show up as an error. It kind of sounds like a, so you really can't have a null relationship to HOH. So it sounds like software allowing you to not enter a value that's required, which then doesn't, of course, trigger a later error checking. I mean, that kind of sounds like a local issue to work through with your vendor. Meredith, do you have any input on error message checking on the APRs as they come into Sage, and like when something isn't triggering an error that should because another value is missing, or any, you know, do you guys have any kind of response usually? I guess
so
it
I don't.
like, yeah, sorry.
That wouldn't be something that Sage would validate in the errors when uploading to Sage. We are just validating totals, not looking into that level of detail in those error validations. So, not sure. I need to think about that.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a question in here that I can also just read? Okay.
Yes. Starts with on the APR.
Is that a data quality? Sorry, Mary, you can move on while I read.
Yeah, no worries. I'm looking at other things. Oh, you know, good question. Maybe this, we could all kind of jump in on our opinions on this, but the difference between no exit interview completed and destination versus data not collected. So data not collected is traditionally a thing that the vendors can use to fill in a value of 99 for when it's missing. Actually, it kind of applies to the APR question too, right? So you can imagine if you've got an export running out of HMIS, let's say APRs or SSB uploads or CSVs or whatever, and for some reason your screens, your software on the front end didn't enforce the data collection of a required field, data not collected is a value that would be ascribed to that null field so that it could pass validation and not hit null error messages, right? 99 is a code that can be used to fill in where the data is like missing for data transfer purposes. That's kind of how I think of data not collected, versus where you have an option that is kind of allowing you to specify, like, I didn't not collect this data. I didn't ignore this data, but the client left before I could ask what their destination is, and so I'm putting no exit interview completed. So it's like data not collected, I kind of equate to null. It's like a way to not have something be null. It kind of, and it's the same. And also, when you look at the reporting programming specifications for almost every HUD report, and definitely some VA reports I know of, and then probably a lot of what you're doing locally, client doesn't know, client refused, data not collected, and in the case of destination, exit interview not completed. Like all of those kind of just equate, and other usually falls in this category too, equates to just we don't know that information for one reason or another. But a lot of the question, not a lot, but a few of the folks on the call, Meredith, are asking, why do we even need client exit interview not completed if we have data not collected? Oh, you're muted, my friend.
Yeah, I was unmuted, and then I muted myself.
Because I
One of these days.
I kept talking, sorry.
No, that's okay. I think the important thing to keep in mind is you have client doesn't know, so the client doesn't know the information, or the client refused to provide you the information, and then you've got data not collected, which in another way of sort of what Mary is saying is that the worker just skipped the question, right? Like the worker didn't ask the question. So it's not that the client wouldn't provide them the information or doesn't know the information, it's that they weren't asked to provide the information. So whether that's you literally didn't have the person to see to ask the question, or you're just clicking through to get through the intake process in your system, whatever that means to you, at the end of the day, it means that the worker didn't collect the information for one reason or the other. And I think that's a distinction that at some point, and maybe it's not relevant anymore, that was important for folks to understand. Like, why is the data not collected? Is it because the client doesn't know, the client refused to provide it, or the worker didn't ask the question, or didn't have the opportunity? And that feels punitive when I say the worker didn't ask the question. I don't mean it that way, but it's just that distinction between it's a client-driven decision or a worker-driven decision, sort of. So I think that's a reason why there is that distinction between those three different categories. At the end of the day, it's all missing data, right? It's just, why is it missing? And, there's some communities that use that information in training and case management development and professional development. Like, if all of your clients are refusing to provide you information, is there something in your engagement work with your clients that could be improved upon so that you could build that relationship and that rapport to where they don't refuse to provide you with their information all the time? Like, there's different things like that that maybe can be used at a local level for, using those different breakdowns of that missing data.
Thank you, Meredith. Okay, still just we're
can I say
reading? So please.
I have a couple I did want to talk about.
Okay, great.
Let's talk about the reporting dates for ESGCV and the terms we use, because that's one of the most complicated things. So we have, it was on this slide that someone asked about it. So there was the initial report period. That was sometime at the point at which you started funding and operating your ESGCV projects through September 30th. There wasn't a hard and fast start date. There wasn't a quarter. It was anywhere from 1 day to, 9 months that initial report period covered, depending on your community. Beginning on October 1st, which is the beginning of the federal fiscal year, that is quarter one. That is quarter one reporting. So when we're talking about ESGCV reporting, we will say initial period, which is everything before 10/1, so everything that ended on 9/30, and then Q1, quarter one, is the federal fiscal quarter one. So that's October 1st through December 31st. And then Q2 would be January through March of 2021. So I know it's a little bit confusing for folks when we keep talking about Q1 and they think it's that initial report period. It's not. The initial report period ended September 30th. Q1 ends December 31st. And I want to build on that question for another follow-up here. Like Scott was saying, we know that there were late starters. We know that there were projects that maybe should have been reported on in the initial period, but for myriad reasons were not. HUD is not requiring recipients to go back and edit those initial reports. Instead, we're just adding that client data into this Q1 report, so that 10/1 through 12/31 time period. That data will be included in the Q1 report instead of going back to the initial report and modifying it.
Rock on. I thought that was clear. Me personally.
So Audrey, the cumulative start date was set in the initial report. So that's what your reporting will go back to. But again, from the HMIS leads perspective, you all don't have to figure out the dates. SAGE is figuring out the dates based on the information that the recipient recorded about when the project started. So you should follow the instructions that are given in the HMIS reporting repository portal, I think is what we call it, SAGE reporting portal, when you get that email. So those dates should be preset. I would very strongly encourage you to just review those dates, and if you have questions about them during that 3-day period, talk to your recipient, but you shouldn't have to set the dates, you don't have to change the dates, you don't have to do anything other than follow the dates that are provided to you from SAGE. The ESG reporting schedule is available, and I can throw a link in, or Scott, can you throw a link into the ESG CV reporting guide? The first page of that guide breaks out all the different quarters. And when the reports are due.
Trying to kind of just go from the top to the bottom and make sure things that we can answer on this call are answered. We made good use of this time today, I think. Love all the discussion around some of the pop quiz answers too. It's great. Anyone want to go? I'm still just trying to kind of scroll down. I'm not seeing anything to bring up, but want to make sure I'm looking at every question before we sign off. Brian or Jesse or Scott or Fran.
Can you guys hear me now?
We can hear you.
Okay, good. So I did want to talk about one thing. We have a question in about, like, why is it that some of the flags give you helpful information like a project ID and some of the flags do not? And the reason for that is because the LSA itself is aggregated data. And so when a flag is triggered, we try to give you, and we do, give you as much information as is available in the file. So if the error that's being triggered is connected to a specific project, we can give you that project ID. But if the error is triggered for all permanent supportive housing projects, we don't know which project is causing the particular issue. So if you look at, there's a column in your error warning file that says level, and if it says the level is the COC, we're not going to have the level of data to be able to give you an ID. So that's the reason that not all of them have it, is because we don't have those IDs for every single issue that comes up.
A complicated report to program and therefore complicated to data queue back to exact problems. But general answer is work with your data liaison, right? If you're having, I'm kind of seeing some of these answer questions around anxiety around what is, you know, deadlines, or even though HUD has nicely extended the deadline on the LSA, like there's still issues to resolve and you still got to work through the process, and your data liaison is the best place to start, right, to escalate your concerns. Jesse, you can give a nod or a no if I'm not saying that right, but the data liaison is the place to go. If you are having concerns or worried about LSA stuff, start there. And they have avenues to escalate issues as needed.
Absolutely.
We're getting there. We're just going to keep getting better and better and better as we go, too. That's part of the point of working with you, like this is to make good changes where we can, explanations, and provide guidance so that you're not feeling in the dark. So keep engaging. You guys know all the ways you can engage with us. The AAQs are the key. Coming to these monthly calls. We're going to have a monthly call pretty much every month in 2021 unless, you know, for some reason we need to cancel something. So everything's on the calendars with all these lovely faces you see on the screen, and we will try and be here for you as we enter into our next calendar year. There are resources on the HUD Exchange. There was a few questions about where can we send people who still have questions about this. If you want to go and find your own answers to stuff, have at it. We love that. There's great resources, a lot of time spent putting documentation up on the HUD Exchange for you to access it. What was that term used the other day, Brian, in an AAQ? Oh, Google Fu instead of Kung Fu. Somebody Google Fu'd it before they came to us. I like that. Again, go to the past webinar archives on the hub, not the HUD Exchange. HUD Exchange is the public-facing website. The hub you need to sign up for. You can do that by submitting an email to hmis@cloudburstgroup.com. And so I did do a best of joke recap here, so we don't need to rank them or vote, but I thought I would throw out those jokes that I personally thought were great. And some of them I didn't even say on this call. They just came in after the fact. So have a laugh where you can in your life, because laughing makes things better. And thanks to everybody who just hangs out with me and us. It's fun. So, you know, and the one that I was going to say today, which isn't on there because it doesn't get on the best of list if I haven't said it yet. Why was the broom late? Because it overslept.
Well done, Mary.
Thanks. It's a good way to end the year. All right, now that I'm all super red cheeked, shall we call it? There's our coming meeting date. We're going to release this slide deck, the recording, and all these Q&As to the hub next week. So we will talk to you in the new year. Have a great holiday season, and thanks for hanging out. Thank you, presenters.